Okay, we will start with the playing with the video. So hope you enjoy.
Ờ.係啦，冇人呢啲出咗事，大家都明白。係啦，啱，你唔可以啊。
Hi, a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Shakira Ibrahim from Malaysia Steel Institute. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you this morning. I would like to thank you for joining us for this informative presentation on forging ESG for the future of your business, capture, analyze, read, and trade. This webinar is organized by Malaysia Steel Institute. Today's event will help our iron and steel industry to move towards ESG compliance. Before that, let's take a look at the agenda, which comprises of 4 parts. We will start with welcome address from Mr. Lim Kem Yao, Chief Executive Officer from Malaysia Steel Institute. Then we move to the part 1, carbon exchange from Metaverse Green Exchange, Mr. Bo Bai. And then the part 2, we continue with Mr. Tony Wine, CEO for Turnkey Asia Global. Then we move towards to the part 3, Rate Your Initiative, from Mr. Pramod Das, Deputy Group CEO of RAM and COO of RAM Sustainability. Then we move to the part 4, Mr. Azlan Azhar, the Director of the Penjana Eco. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start our webinar session, please to inform that if you have any question, please state your question in the following format: name, phone number, email, speaker, and question. We will also share this format in the chat box. For those questions that cannot be answered during today's session, we will provide answers via email. We will also upload the presentation material on MSI webinar on MSI website after this session. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I would like to welcome Mr. Gerard Lim, Chief Executive Officer of Malaysia Steel Institute, for the welcoming speech. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Lim Kem Yao.
Very good morning, fellow colleagues from meeting agency, Tan Sri, Dato Sri, Dato, ladies and gentlemen, members from the Iron Steel Association, honorable speakers, Mr. Tony Wines, CEO of Turnkey Asia Global, Mr. Pramod Das, Deputy Group CEO of RAM Holding Berhad and CEO of RAM Sustainability Sdn Berhad, Mr. Bobai, CEO of MVGX Private Limited, Mr. Graber Wong, Chief Commercial of MVGX Private Limited, Mr. Adlan Azhar, Director of Penjana Eco Sdn Berhad, and our lovely moderator, Ms. Rina Neo. Ladies and gentlemen, a big thank you and warm welcome to all of you for taking time out from your busy schedule to facilitate this important webinar, Forging ESG for the Future of Your Business, Capture, Analyze, Rate, and Trade. That will form the foundation and provide the steel players in Malaysia exposure on what it takes to comply with environment, social, and governance, that is ESG requirements. Early steps needs to be taken to meet ESG requirements so as not to be left out and become uncompetitive globally. This is an initiative by MSI in collaboration with Bencana Eco Semen Berhad, RAM Sustainability Semen Berhad, Turnkey Asia Global, and MBGX Private Limited. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to say a few words about Malaysia Steel Institute, MSI. MSI is a government agency wholly funded by the Ministry of International Trade Industry, MITI. This agency was established in July 2013 and 2022 marks our 9th year of operation. MSI mission is to reshape and facilitate the environment for a sustainable iron steel industry. We offer membership to all steel players and interested parties. Currently, we have 36 active members under our membership program. Ladies and gentlemen, the iron steel industry employ 51,756 workforce in 2021. And steel product is one of the top 10 traded manufactured goods in Malaysia. From January to September this year, the total trade value of the iron steel products stood at 52.2 billion ringgit, and comparing the same period last year, we did 44.3 billion. This gives an increase of 17.7%. Further, the total trade have improved from a trade deficit of 3.5 billion in 2021 to a trade deficit of 1.1 billion only in 2022. The total trade in 2022 is expected to surplus the 2021 numbers, which was recorded at 62.9 billion ringgit. As the economic contribution of steel industry to Malaysia is significant, it's crucial for the industry to start adopting ESG. According to the World Economic Forum, steel is the largest carbon-emitting manufacturing sector, which generates 7% of all man-made emission. Where the production of steel releases large amount of carbon dioxide, nitrogen oxide, and particulate matters into the air. Reducing this emission is critical as the global decarbonization agenda accelerates for the steel players to remain in business. Steelmakers in the mid to long term need accordingly to take early steps to improve in meeting the sustainability standards in their operation that will meet carbon emission requirement, regulation, and capitalize on ESG metrics to gain a competitive edge. Compliance to ESG requirement would also attract investors seeking responsible investment opportunities. The ESG framework requires steel players to provide transparency and data analysis, creating a revolution on how corporate value is assessed. Further, ESG will lead companies to conduct traceability at the center at their operation facilities, supporting executive decision-making. For this reason, the accelerating decarbonization agenda needs the utmost agenda. Reducing the environment impact of the industry will require a significant effort across the life cycle of steelmaking. Steel players will need to commit in deploying energy efficiency measures, adopting and investing in circular economic principle, improving material efficiency and waste management, and investing in low carbon emission technology for the steel production. To kickstart the outreach on ESG and in order to create awareness among Malaysia's steel players, this webinar titled Forging ESG for the Future of Your Business, Capture, Analyze, Rate and Trade will share with all participants the methods to harvest the opportunity arising from complying to ESG standards and good practices. This is where MSI is facilitating the steel sector to move forward towards adopting ESG by gathering related experts in related fields and provide exposure on ESG matters. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And before we move to the next session of today's webinar session, may I humbly request all attendees to switch on your video camera on your computer for a group photo session. Thank you.
Okay, we start with taking photo now. This page. Second page. Third page. Okay. Thank you all for the cooperation. Thank you, Mr. Lim Keng Yao. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Ms. Rina Neo. Rina is currently sits on the board of MATRI, the National Trade Promotion Agency of Malaysia, and serves as the Secretary General of ESG Association of Malaysia. Rina Neo has more than 25 years of experience in both the corporate, entrepreneurial, and investment. Rina holds strategic management roles, directorships in Eclimo EV, Mind Champs International Preschool, Bounty Esports Co and is co-founder of Ficus Capital, the world's first ESGI venture capital. Rina is an advocate of women's entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, educational empowerment, poverty eradication, and volunteerism work, and is currently pursuing her doctorate in business focusing on ESG disclosure. Ms. Rina Neo, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Shakira. Thank you, Mr. Lim, for the opening speech. Glad to have everybody here today. I hope you guys will have a fruitful session. So it is my pleasure to introduce our very first guest speaker, Mr. Bobai, CEO of Meta Green Private Limited, who will be presenting a paper on carbon trading and how it works for you. So before we move on to give the floor to Mr. Bobai, we will have time to take one or two questions after Mr. Bobai's presentation. So kindly make your question precise and short. So Mr. Bobai, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Raina, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to have the honor today to meet everybody. I very much appreciate MSI's invitation. Today, the topic is about carbon and then how ESG and carbon may play a role for our steel industry. And standing here, speaking to all of you, I actually feel pretty excited and then happy about it. I have been in steel industry over the past 10 years, mostly investing in China. So I've been working with Baosteel and Ansteel, the number 1, number 2 steel companies over the past 8 years for part of their ESG endeavor. In addition, I was lucky enough to be able to invest in Chongqing Steel, which is a local provincial steel mill that produces about 7.1 million tons of steel this year. And then to go through their whole journey as well as both an investor as well as almost their chief sustainability officer. It's very exciting to see so many friends from Malaysian steel industry on this call. And I'm very happy to share as a part of that journey that I've gone through over the past decade and then how carbon matters for this whole journey for steel industry. But before we hit on the carbon, if I put myself in your shoes as the CEO, as the board member, and then CFO, and then chief sustainability officer of the steel companies, ESG is becoming bigger and a bigger matter. From all my past decade of experience working with the steel industry, and I have seen how the ESG journey of the company has gone through. Generally, we start from first, we don't care about ESG, to the second stage, where the marketing as well as the government requirement are becoming more and more stringent. So you care more about ESG. To the third, really from advocacy to actions to put ESG as part of the negative list. There are things that as a corporate, we just don't do anymore. To the phase 4, where you actually move on to ESG proactively. How do I move my furnace to electric arc furnace? How do I further improve my carbon capture efforts? How do I further improve the energy efficiency with all sorts of technology? And lastly, and as what we observe again and again, as you can see some other steel mills, particularly in US and Japan, ESG is increasingly becoming a competitive advantage. It becomes gradually not only necessary, but sort of a must do in order to better compete on global stand. So with that as sort of a backstop, and then let's talk about carbon. If you can flip to the next page. Next page. Climate impact matters because increasingly this is the organization that are driving all sorts of policy that will impact all our steel operation. On the European Union side, you are gradually having CBAM, the border tax, and then all these other entities, the financing entities, will impact your ability to secure financing, as we all are, very aware day in and day out that we are a very capital intensive business. Next page. And as part of that, all the macro global initiatives, this including both the disclosure and the transition of financing requirement. On the disclosure side, TCFD, the task force, have been very proactive to set the disclosure standard. The taxonomy of the EU is also becoming very important. And then the BIS, the central bank of a central bank, is also putting a lot of innovative structure in order to facilitate these type of efforts. On the transition financing side, and then from OECD to G20 that is happening right now, and to all the bank tests and so forth. So we as an organization have been working quite closely with many of these organizations because they are many times the decision maker and then really policy setter. Next page. Most importantly, and I think for your organization, is you can begin to see the carbon regime come from different countries and different regions. Generally, there are two types of carbon market. One is compliance market, which is usually for emitters, such as steel mills. One is a voluntary carbon credit market, which is generally for the green and sustainable companies, such as wind and solar and nature-based solution, the forest concession owners. And different countries chose different way to deal with that, such as Singapore chose carbon tax to deal with it. European Union and China chose carbon emission trading scheme to deal with it. And I was actually quite involved in helping China to establish that carbon trading scheme over the past decade after I spent a decade working in the States. And increasingly, not only within the country, the trading scheme matter, you are beginning to see more cross-border international schemes that will very quickly matter to your business. For example, carbon border adjustment mechanism by European Union, the very famous CBAM. This is essentially carbon border tax for your export of steel to European Union. They will need to assess the carbon footprint of those products with the highest standard, most likely ISO standard, and then based on that, to be able to charge additional import tax, which will be very hurtful for some of those businesses. And you probably also read the news about the United States is considering some of the carbon border tax regime as well. Very little reported, but for industry insiders probably also know very well is also the activities of many of your customers, China. I believe some of you actually export a fair amount of your product to the China market, and I assume many part of your products are purchased by China, mostly state-owned entities. I've been working with many of them as a part of our carbon neutral efforts. SASAC, which is China's state-owned asset administrator, very recently just announced the requirement for carbon disclosure by state-owned entities, particularly heavy industrial companies such as China's buyers of steel. So that will step by step put them to require their supply chain to report the carbon footprint as well. So what I'm saying is carbon matters to you. European Union wants to know the carbon footprint of your product. United States is putting regime to want to know the carbon footprint of your product. China did not broadcast, but they will require the carbon footprint of this product. Next page. When you put all those things together, it is very important to have the right system. Because if you use CBAM as an example, it can potentially cost a lot of money, add a lot of additional cost to your carbon if it's really charged by 75 euro or 100 euro per metric ton. But if many of those efforts can be taken care of before it even exported to European Union or China, I think the competitive advantage will begin to emerge for those companies who embrace ESG, who embrace the journey of carbon versus those ones who are reluctant to deal with it. Next page. What do we do? MVGX, Metaverse Green Exchange. We are a carbon software company, number one. Number two, we are an exchange based in Singapore and licensed by Singapore. Most importantly is carbon software needs to be dealt with from beginning to end with the highest standard. We essentially put the system to allow the companies such as yours to follow ISO standard to measure the carbon footprint for your operation, which is ISO 14064, or for the product, which is ISO 14067. And then that go down the journey to be able to potentially trade it with the carbon credits and then to neutralize. At this stage, I want to also bring a 5-step procedure, what we have been working with many industrial companies, particularly the CEOs and the Chief Sustainability Officer. That is MMOCF. Measurement, mitigate, offset, certificate, and financing. Next page. In order to measure properly, next page. So, because you really need to start by understanding your balance sheet. Everybody knows your financial balance sheet, how much cash, how much assets, and how much liabilities that you have. Increasingly, as the world is evolving, we essentially have a carbon balance sheet to determine as well. And some of this pressure coming from regulators, consumer activists, financiers, and investors. So increasingly the need to understand the carbon assets and the carbon liability. Similar to you will have a ERP system to measure and capture all your financial balance sheet. Carbon-wise, we are essentially have worked out with the leading agencies such as BSI, British Standards Institute, to prepare the software system with the ISO standard to allow you to measure a carbon emission, but also at the same time, when you go through the mitigation efforts, you're going to create some benefits to the environment based on your baseline. And then some of them may be turned into carbon assets. So that needs to be certified and turned into potential assets as well. So I think that is one big effort is to make the measurement work. Next page. After measurement, before even you buying the carbon credit, it's also important to carry out the mitigation efforts. This is why at this time, not only the Chief Sustainability Officer needs to care about it, it's really going to be the CEO and then the board to drive the company to find the best solutions. Are we really going to move a portion of our furnace to electric arc? Are we really going to improve our supply chain or the whole heat management system? Are we going to do heat recovery to mitigate some of those emissions and so on and so forth? So mitigation becomes also core elements of what we do. But for steel mill as a very heavy industrial assets, it's impossible to get a carbon net zero by purely mitigate. So you will still need to offset the residual carbon footprint by carbon credits. So that is also why an exchange system, a trading system, is needed in order to obtain those high quality, fully traceable carbon credit for that purpose to create an offset. After measurement, after mitigate, after purchasing some carbon credit to offset your residual carbon footprint, in order to prepare yourself for international export, you need to certificate. And that certificate comes from BSI, come from TUSUD, so based on international certificate. And then we, as a carbon software provider, and as also carbon credit exchange places, we are providing all those carbon credits to help you to offset. We provide the software to help you to measure and then to obtain the certificate from the international agency, as well as our partnership with RAM as well, for you to get your correct ranking in the system. Next page. And all in all, after the carbon credit measurement, carbon footprint measurement, carbon neutrality measurement, that is what we call CMS system, carbon management system. That is equivalent to your financial ERP system. While we have all this system going, this will allow you to be able to march on your journey of net zero, march on your journey to improve your competitive advantage. Next page. And then that is the journey allows the industry companies to prepare to what I said earlier about the US, the European Union, the China's, your end markets requirement for some of this carbon situation and the carbon accounting, carbon ERP. And then lastly, next page. I think increasingly this journey allows you from the verification to offset to neutrality to the declaration. Next page. But more importantly, we're doing all this with the right certificate to be able to become useful for your financing purpose as well. These are some sample examples from a BSI, British Standards Institution, on the carbon footprint, as well as on carbon neutral validation certificate for operation as well as for product. Next page. The system is designed to have the highest, pillar of integrity from standards as well as technology, because carbon, the whole process is calculated. As we always say, it's a link. You cannot drop a link. Otherwise, the chain is very hard to keep track of which carbon comes from where, who used it to offset. And then when we did all these efforts, because this leads to the last elements I want to say, financing. Increasingly, the financial institutions are very concerned about heavy emitting industry, and hence being in that industry to be ranked top quartile, top 10%, top 5% in terms of your carbon neutral or climate situation will go a long way to attract good investors, potentially provide debt and equity and financing. So in summary, I think it's very exciting to be able to be here to share, and we will be very excited to provide our service to help you through that journey of measurement, mitigate, offset, certificate, and financing. And anything we can be helpful, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bobai, for a very insightful presentation. If you have any questions, do chat with us. I don't see any question coming, but I do have a question for you, Mr. Bobai. In essence, what carbon market do is basically turning CO2 into commodity and by giving it a price, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. And there were mention about voluntary and compliance market. Maybe, most of us are still, quite unsure what these two terms means. Maybe, if you can summarize for us, what are the two differences between the voluntary and the compliance market?
No problem. The compliance market, for example, as a part of your steel mill operation, the government gives you an allowance of how much you can emit. Hypothetically, you can emit 1 million tons this year of carbon. But because of your good efforts of operation, you only emitted 900,000 tons. And as such, at the end of the year, you have 100,000 tons of a surplus that you did not emit. And that you can sell to people who emitted more than what they were allowed. That is the compliance market in the format of an emission trading scheme, sometimes called cap and trade. Cap, how much you're allowed to emit, and trade, the surplus or the deficit. So that's the compliance market. Voluntary carbon market are those efforts to drive additional carbon offset. For example, you go to do a reforestation project for the land, and that reforestation project will cause capex to develop. After development, you are generating carbon, you're absorbing carbon dioxide because the trees are growing, and then from that, there are certain United Nations methodology to calculate how much carbon credit is generated from that. So, and then as the concession owner, a forest concession owner, you suddenly own some additional assets. It's called voluntary carbon credits that you can sell to people. Now, the next natural question is, what's the relationship between these two markets? The relationship is depending on how government is setting the standard. For example, many very common in both the European Union, China, Singapore, the compliance market will have a percentage of that being able to leverage the voluntary market credits to satisfy the requirement. Usually right now, it's about 5%, which means 5% of that allowance market is able to be offset through the voluntary carbon credits. So this is within the country. It gets even trickier when you get to cross-border. For example, how do you sell Malaysia's carbon credit to, let's say, Singapore? Because carbon credit has a passport as a result of the Paris Agreement, because Malaysia has a commitment to United Nations on your carbon emission reduction. And as such, the voluntary carbon credit has a passport. And that's the core part of our invention and the solution to solve the cross-border trading of carbon credit to help Malaysia to get FDI, but at the same time, not to jeopardize your commitment to United Nations for your national determined contribution. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you very much. I think that is really clear and precise for those of us who are still, trying to figure out, what it is. So thank you again, Mr. Bobai, for that, wonderful presentation. I think you made the slides very clear for us, especially those who are starting to embark on this journey. So coming up next, we have our second presenter, Mr. Tony Wines. Tony is actually the CEO of Turnkey Asia Global. Tony, the floor is yours.
Very much indeed, Rina. Good morning, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for this kind invitation to present to yourselves here and to MSI for this opportunity as well. Thank you very much indeed. So, fantastic presentation for Mr. Bobai to give us a really good insight into this whole carbon credit process. I think I'd also like now to talk a little bit about the very key fundamental requirement within ESG, which is the importance of data and how we're using data to develop ESG strategies, and why is data so important in this process for companies in the steel industry, but throughout the world as well. If I might move to the next slide. So just a little bit about our organization. Turnkey is what I would call an industry veteran. We've been in the industry for 12 years, and we started back in 2013 as a concept, and moved into this whole process around ESG disclosure, ESG reporting, ESG data, working with listed companies, working with multiple stock exchanges around the world, particularly the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, the Singapore Stock Exchange, increasingly Bursa, and many other exchanges as well. Our organization focuses on capturing ESG data at source from companies, organizations, manufacturers who have detailed consumption and carbon footprints. So industries where there's a significant carbon footprint, we're here to help understand the process, how to capture that information, how to provide comprehensive insights into the business, and make sure that the organizations see benefit in ESG data to improve performance, to improve productivity, and understanding that ESG is a long journey. It isn't something that happens overnight. It's a case of starting the first piece as well, and then graduating into something stronger over a long period of time. Our organization captures data from 48 countries and about 8,000 locations around the world at this point. Next slide, please. And I think what's very important is before we even talk about regulations and we talk a little bit about compliance, which is of course one of the key facets why we're here, I think it's very important to also recognize that we're in this industry because there are significant issues to address beyond pure compliance and pure regulation. The world has got a very significant issue around climate change. And at the forefront of this climate change issue, the Southeast Asia countries and Asia in particular is really at the forefront of these very, very comprehensive and powerful issues that we need to contend with. Certainly, we're seeing changes in climate change throughout the Southeast Asia markets. Malaysia, for instance, is suffering from higher levels of flooding than ever before. Heat and humidity changes, rainfall changes, and that's affecting employment. That's affecting the way that companies run their businesses. So we have a significant issue to address beyond the fact that we need to do this commercially, and we need to do this in a way that adds value to businesses. And I think throughout this whole process, we'll be talking about how we can do good, but at the same time, how we can use data to fund the structure and make the steel industry more productive and more effective and get seen as a market-leading role, a market-leading industry within that ESG space. And to take this one step further, we're seeing a significant trend in what we would call the decarbonization and energy transition process around the world. So what we've noticed is, of course, a lot of organizations, manufacturers, and logistics companies, many multiple sectors, including the steel industry, is going into an energy transition process. This is required to ensure that you can get better levels of investment, that you can attract more investment, that you can get better bank loans, bank terms around ESG. So there's a fundamental importance around by showcasing that you can transition and provide good quality data around your energy consumption. You can actually also get a benefit financially from this whole process and attract investors and attract the banking community to provide longer term financing, which I think is critical for an industry such as the steel industry. Malaysia, of course, has also got directives governmentally, and we'll see what happens from COP27. But Malaysia has, of course, got very, very strong ambitions to go carbon neutral by 2050. This is a very strong goal that's led by the governments, and that will also, of course, affect industry to showcase how decarbonization goals can be reached. And that will require much higher levels of ESG disclosure. It will require longer term thinking in how organizations are providing that data. And it will require us to think about ESG in terms of carbon accounting for the very first time. So whereas we've often been able to just get a carbon footprint on an annual basis, we're increasingly seeing carbon accounting coming into fruition, which means more regular reporting on your carbon footprint by location on a monthly or quarterly basis, and tying that into integrated financial reporting. The next slide, please. And this is why we believe that from the steel sector, ESG data is going to be very, very important for the industry and for corporations within this whole process. There is an investment risk. We're recognizing there's more and more investment risk when companies do not provide good ESG disclosure. There's less opportunity to receive financing Certain investors do not want to invest in heavy industries where there's no ESG disclosure, or it's seen as being a dirty industry. So there's a very strong and important focus around ESG disclosure, ESG data, to allow yourselves to compete in the industry and to ensure that you can attract investors in the process as well. There's also the ability naturally to differentiate to competitors. So as we start to distribute product around the world, how can we make sure that the Malaysian steel industry is seen as one of the leaders in providing good quality data, good quality disclosure, allowing the industry to compete more readily against other countries, against other steel providers around the world, and showcase how your products can actually be more effective, more competitive in a global structure. We also are noticing, sorry, can we just go back a little bit? We just on the other 2 points. Transparency portfolio is all about valuation. So what we do notice is that when you provide good quality ESG disclosure, you can actually get a better valuation of your business. And that's increasingly been proven by the private equity sector, by the banking community, who are focusing very heavily on the use of proceeds around the valuation of a company with good ESG disclosure. And that allows you to provide cost savings in the business. So when you actually look at this, you can actually see productivity gains and improve your investor relations benefits as an organization as well. Thank you. Next slide. One of the things we recognize in every industry, and some of the reasons why ESG has been a slow-moving product, despite the fact that it is a incredibly important part of every business now, is, and I think we see this in every market, including Malaysia, a fragmented and confusing landscape. So many organizations, I think, are aware that ESG is important, that ESG data is critical, but a lot of organizations don't know how to start this process. There's a lack of real-time information. There are a multitude of different reporting structures which are complicated. There's multiple ratings. Regulatory and compliance bodies come in with multiple changes to their regulatory requirements. And this creates a complication for many organizations to understand where to start. One of the things that we believe is very important for the steel sector is to start a process of graduation, which is to start with a very simple set of indicators that provide great value to the business, and then graduate your organization slowly into more and more comprehensive data construction. And that would avoid the confusion that we see in the landscape at the moment, and would provide you with better outputs and better landscape capabilities to drive value into your business. Next slide, please. And this is just an example, and I think Bobai mentioned a lot of this. This is the reason why we have to get data into a structured format, is that there is a comprehensive and increasing level of framework and regulation in the industry today. There's at least 50 to 60 different types of framework in Europe alone. Many organizations don't know which of these frameworks are the most prevalent. So we, of course, can help to decide which of these frameworks is the most suitable. TCFD, for instance, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and reporting to exchanges are good starting points to drive this kind of format across the industry. But how do you make sure that you are complying and getting good quality data around these multiple frameworks is something that's going to be very important for the industry itself. And this is the real drivers, I think, for companies in the steel sector and every sector to drive better disclosure. Firstly, we have three sectors. We have the mandatory regulation, where there is now increasingly mandated reporting taking place. It used to be voluntary. It's now going into mandated processes. There's government commitments. There's drivers from the stock exchanges. There's also market sector legislation. So even from the steel sector, there's increasing regulation and increasing legislation for the sector itself to comply with. And of course, there's more and more requirement to improve regulations through ratings and certifications. We also have, from the financial markets, more and more focus from private equity, from the banking sector, who are demanding good quality ESG disclosure to make calculated decisions on the business. That data is, of course, important for the valuation of your organization. So the better the data, the better the valuation. That also allows you to create better use of proceeds and better foundational capabilities from green bonds and sustainability loans, and also the ability to increase the price and value of your business, which I think is very, very important. And also to bear in mind that there is an issue if you don't take these things into consideration. There's pressure from NGOs on the company brand, so vulnerability is becoming a real key risk within an organization. there's increasingly more highlighted, what we would describe as ESG scandals from companies who have reported inaccurately and have faced some comprehensive fines as a result of that. So how do we mitigate that with good quality data? Of course, those problems create a loss of share value and are perceived as greenwashing within that supply chain. All of this, therefore, entails organizations to provide real-time data, integrated reporting, with a mixture of consultative support and transparency into the operation of the business. Could you just press this? Could you just push the slide a bit more? There's a few. Thank you. Just about half a dozen. A few more. Thank you. That's great. No, just back one. Thank you. And this is just an example of a roadmap within ESG. So one of the things we would like to talk about is when you start the process of developing an ESG program, the important thing is to recognize that this is not something that can be done overnight. It's a case of actually structuring the business on a graduated basis, getting good quality disclosure as a starting point. And we say that here's an example here of a company that we work with that took 4 years, up to 5 years, to actually build out their ESG strategy, starting with basic KPIs, collection process, establishing a 5-year framework, pledging on certain elements, reporting eventually on their performance through sustainability reporting, adopting more and more KPIs within the business in years 2, 3, and 4, and then eventually rolling out their business and getting bought and acquired by a large international player. So this is just an example of why we want to recognize that to start this process, one shouldn't be daunted by the process of ESG. It's a case of starting gradually, a few key KPIs, a few key areas that benefit the business, and then graduating into more and more transparency as an organization. And a lot of the companies that we work with and a lot of the organizations that we see globally, this roadmap can take up to 5 years. So it's a graduated basis and something that you can develop over time. And this is just an example of the types of data that is being expected of companies nowadays to comply with certain regulatory requirements. So in terms of key reporting, companies are being evaluated in terms of their energy consumption, their overall emissions, their GHG emissions on a quarterly basis, waste, fuel, and operations. We call it Scope 1 and Scope 2, and also Scope 3, which is going down to the supplier level. We also see an increasing level of focus on social data, social responsibility, diversity and inclusion, training, staff turnover rates, and health and safety, as well as logistics. None of this can be done in one go. It's very, very obviously complicated to do everything in one go. So it's a graduated process, probably starting on the environmental focus to get good quality data there. And this is just an example of the type of data that you might see. Firstly, we showcase data in terms of risk and compliance. So what are the things that the organization is undertaking? This is an ESG assessment, for instance, to showcase the current capabilities of an organization in terms of their ESG capability. What have they got in place? What do they not have in place? And what are the steps that they need to take to start building out an ESG program? So often we start with simple assessment tools just to get the process going. And then we move into slightly more complicated data sets in the next slide, which is actually reviewing the full performance of a company in terms of detailed sustainability analytics, benchmarking, supplier performance, productivity, global data, and real-time information. And this is the type of data that is being adopted by heavy industry around the world at this point. And just to sort of focus on the full ESG data management process, it can be very complicated or seen as very complicated, but if you break it down by just modularized versions, the whole process becomes somewhat simpler. Most organizations today are focusing heavily on energy, water, and waste on the very far left side of the business, graduating into more complicated data around operational, social data, and then risk, and then driving into that CSR and environmental investment, health and safety, logistics, leading towards comprehensive data capture and sustainability reporting on a long-term basis. And this is an example of where the industry is moving at the moment. So if we look at the ESG roadmap, The industry has got some very specific demands. What called carbon mitigation, carbon neutrality is one of the things that are being talked about. But a lot of companies at this point still have got to get to the first point of what we call ESG disclosure and ESG baselining, which is to understand the performance of the business. So this is a typical roadmap of data collection within an organization, starting from evaluation, materiality to understand where your key performance indicators are, reporting against those key performance indicators, looking eventually at benchmarking to see how well you're performing against your industry peers. And then over time, as Bo Bai is mentioning, we will then start to see the ability to create reductions in carbon, the ability to trade, the ability to create carbon offsets and carbon trading and voluntary and mandatory reporting from that point. And that will be all around predictive analysis and long-term AI technology. That's very quickly my presentation. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for the insightful presentation about what Turnkey does and how you've helped clients from different sectors. So let me see if we have any questions from the floor. Okay. Right. Okay, so we don't have questions. Generally, the attendees from Asia is very shy. Even we don't want them to speak up, typing on the chat box. So if they don't have, then I have some question. You mentioned about data, and data is key to what Turnkey is doing, right? How do we ensure that the quality of data is there? Because just like baking a cake, right? Whatever you put, you raw ingredients, that's how your cake comes out. Of course, in the process, it could be like heat and all this. So how does Turnkey ensure that the quality of the data is there? Because you capture automatically, or someone in the organization has to input it.
So the way that we're working is very much around carbon or ESG accounting. So therefore, the actual organization is inputting information. What our system does is it acts almost like an accounting tool, but for ESG disclosure. So once you've inputted certain elements such as energy consumption or an energy bill, it will automatically calculate that carbon footprint for you. At the back end of these systems are multiple emission factor calculations that we have in place. That means that the organization themselves do not have to think too heavily about, am I making sure that I've got my calculations correct? Can I make sure that my validation is correct? The system will take care of all of that, which I think is very important. So that's all about creating standardization in the reporting process. It allows organizations to begin their ESG disclosure in the knowledge that their system integrity at the back end will give them the correct output. And there's multiple checks and balances within these types of data tools to make sure that that is in place.
Okay, right. Thank you. I just want to, get into this because I think one of the challenges for ESG disclosure is always centered around the many frameworks, and then it comes down to the quality of data, right? So whatever you input, if it is not right, then the report is obviously not right.
Exactly.
So yes,
exactly.
Thank you so much, Tony, on that clarification. I think we have a little bit more time, so I have one more question for you, especially on the steel industry. So steel, the mining industry, typically nickel, is basically used in most steel industry. I think probably 2/3 of the world's nickel is used in the steel industry. Now, for those who are in the steel industry, if you want to be ESG compliant, do they have to also make sure that their suppliers are ESG compliant as well?
In the way that the process is going in the industry is increasingly towards that level of disclosure. I think at the moment it would be fair for most companies to be able to just secure what we call scope 1 and scope 2, which is to manage their own ESG disclosure. I think that's the strongest way to start. But eventually over time, regulation wise, there's definitely going to be increasing requirement to move into what we call scope 3. and scope 3 is the actual physical capture of data from suppliers. It's a relatively new, it's been discussed for many years, Rena, but it's only just starting to come into fruition in the last 12 to 18 months that we start to see more supplier disclosure in place. But generally what we would expect is for companies to get their own baseline in their business correct, and then move to that over a prolonged period of time. It could be 2 or 3 years down the line, whatever is the most prevalent. It will definitely come, and some of the EU regulations already state that if above 40% of your carbon footprint is external, as in from suppliers, there's a mandatory reporting mechanism that's coming into force in Europe that says you have to measure your suppliers.
Okay, thank you so much, Tony, for that insights. And do you have any takeaways for our audience? If you can summarize, what you have just shared, what are the 1 or 2 things that you would like the participants to walk away with today?
I think to walk away with the first thing is not to feel too overwhelmed by ESG as a concept, because I think a lot of organizations see this as a cost. They see it as a additional cost to the business, and they see it as quite complicated. We've seen great success in companies who are just starting their journey with a few simple processes, an assessment and some basic data capture. Already that creates significant benefit to an organization, because once you can understand your carbon baseline, you can already start to address where are the possibilities to improve the performance of the business. So I think my takeaway would be just to start the process, start gently, don't feel overwhelmed, and from that point graduate into something more complicated, into something more detailed, and don't feel that it's going to be something that is going to be overwhelmingly complex and resource intensive, because it doesn't have to be.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Tony. Next, we will move to our next speaker, very prominent speaker in Malaysia, Mr. Pramod Das, Deputy Group CEO, RAM, CEO at RAM Sustainability, to begin his paper on ESG framework ratings and how it affects you. Mr. Pramod, the floor is yours.
Hi, can you hear me, right? Just making sure that my microphone is on. Good morning, everyone. When you have 2 good speakers like Suboy and Tony, it's quite interesting now to go into my slides. But I thought I would make it a bit more interesting today, a bit more interactive. So bear with me. I'm going to send you a link to this website that RAM has, and just a short understanding so that you can okay. The website is called analytics@ram.com.my. If you can all click on that, and I will just share my screen shortly. Hang on. Just give me a second. Okay. Do you see this screen? It says Risco Company ESG Scan. Rina, do you see that?
No, we don't see any screen. Just
okay. Let me try that again. Do you see that now?
yes.
Okay. This is something that all of you can play with when I actually start the proper presentation, but I just wanted to illustrate this so that you get the understanding what people are looking at when they talk about ESG. So let me just do this now for you. Let's say your ABC Berhad. Okay, and let's say, okay, let's go together with this. Okay, you're from the steel industry, so let's see industrial products. Okay, does your company have a formal risk management policy and controls? Yes. Okay. Board comprised 50% more independent directors? Yes. Is there any audit qualification in the past 5 years? No. Does the company have any formal anti-corruption policy or practices? Yes. Okay. Does your company have a sustainability policy? Okay. If you're listed, most of you would have a statement. And dedicated resources to manage sustainability, board of directors, maybe the CEO and dedicated staff. Does the company have annual sustainability reporting? Yes. Sustainability statements. Okay. Signatory to any of this? None. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. Revenue size, let's say 50 to 100 million, subsector. Let's see. So iron and steel. Okay, we got that. And go on to the next one. Okay, let's see. Policy to reduce carbon emissions. Following certification, let's say, okay, let's say in this case you don't have any. Quantitative science. Okay, carbon emissions. Company assess. Yes, okay. I assume that. Just bear with me. I'm just trying to show you something at the end of this. Okay, workforce diversity. Okay. None. This company. Okay, yes. Right. Okay. And no. Okay. No. Okay. We are right at the end of this. No. Okay. No. All right. Okay. So in essence, after going through 18 questions, an investor or a banker would come up and say that if you're an iron and steel, typically you're high risk. Okay, I already knew this before I did this, not because I memorized all the moves, but iron and steel is in a high risk market, and from an ESG perspective, and most of your bankers would have started questioning you or sending you ESG brochures to fill up. But we are not here to actually tell you that you are in the difficult spot of the ESG movement or the environment, social governance movement, but it is what we can do from this point onwards. So let me stop the sharing here. Hang on. Okay. I'll get back to my slide proper. Okay. All right. Any questions before I start? You don't have to. You can just switch on your mic and ask me a question. You don't have to type it if it saves you time.
Mr. Pramod?
Right. Yeah.
I'm Minachi from ET. Can you hear me?
Yes. Who's
Okay.
that? Sorry.
Minachi from ET.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
My question is that the questions that you showed just now, is it applicable for big players or is includes for SMEs? You have a different set of questions.
It is okay. If you're an SME or if you're a large corporate, those questions based on our research, give you a ballpark figure. The driver in our approach looks at industry, and so you're an SME maybe in iron and steel. It will be one of the industry factors would drive the where you are, but as we find out what the issues are in the sector, you can do various approaches, but to mitigate or adapt. But if you don't know how the investors or banks look at you, then it's going to be difficult. But the short answer to you is, yeah, if you're an SME, we would probably ask you a few other questions. But as an SME, and I'm not generalizing, but most SMEs would not have a lot of data. And if you work with turnkey, then obviously when they interact with SMEs, then the culture of compiling this data will be there. And banks will require this data, rating agencies will require this data, and maybe if you're in some supply chain of an international group, they also need this data. But data is both foe and friend for ESG, because at this stage, data is inconsistent, standards are inconsistent, and the one-eyed man or woman is at an advantage now, because every little bit of information you give on ESG puts you apart from your competition or puts you apart from the industry. So I'm here to talk about opportunities after knowing where your risk lies. So did that answer your question?
Yes, but then the question is just for the iron and steel industry. Is it applicable to any other industries?
No, those questions are broad questions that you can all, you can latch in. You can choose different industries. We'll use the same questions because these are this is the sort of opening filter. But if you sign on and do a full-blown rating, then we will go into the details. And Risco is something that it's a quick and easy, not an answer, but a quick and easy filter to understand where your ESG risk is. So a lot of this is about taking a lot of complicated things and simplifying it, but simplifying it to a point that it still makes sense, but it doesn't burden you so much. So I just wanted to bring some realism in showing you that first before I went through my slides, because the slides you can read and you can understand. But when a lot of companies talk about ESG, about 5 years ago, when we were talking to companies about ESG, they told us that they were doing CSR. Nowadays, a lot of companies call us because the banks are calling them and asking them ESG questions. And then these companies ask us, how do we go about it and so on. So think about ESG as something you have to do. Tony put it nicely. He said that it is something that you don't get too complicated about, but if you keep it simple, it'll work for you. If you align it with your strategies, it'll work for you, and so on. All right. So I will get down to the presentation. I can
Thank
see Rina looking very anxious, but yeah, I'll get down and behave and be a typical presenter now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Can I move on to the next slide, please? Okay. This is a funny cartoon I like to use. So one guy looks at it, caveman, and he says he found fire. The other guy looks at it and he found climate change. Now, if you look at this whole issue of climate change has always been there. And what the difference now is climate change is accelerated because of mankind. We have lost our controls on how much CO2 is being produced, but it is also not very difficult to turn things back. One element that makes things different is technology. We are now forced to innovate and think out of the box. Who would have heard of something called green hydrogen and blue hydrogen and so on? So when you look at ESG, look at it from two different points of view. Yes, it's risk assessment. It is also the ability to do something new, something better, and you start off by getting information. Next slide, please. Okay. Can you click twice? Okay. 1 ton of steel, and I'm talking to steel people. I'm not talking to the financial sector. Maybe you know better numbers than this, but this is what I got from World Steel. 1 ton of steel produces 1.85 tons of CO2. So it's quite bad, and 7 to 9% of global CO2 emissions from steel. And you see this chart has been escalating over the years. Now, a lot of it, if you look through what World Steel has and some of the other agencies that are looking at steel, one major area to cut back is the use of technology and using green hydrogen. So there are a lot of opportunities for that, but those are big macro things. Governments have to take shape, but what can you do now? Next slide, please. Okay. I just wanted to give you the big picture perspective. You are in the real economy, the financial economy that gathers the savings for the group of people on the left or right of the chart is now being influenced by people like me who work in credit rating agencies / sustainability agencies, foundations, exchanges, banks, and insurance companies. So the money that we call savings, which is an EPF, in Tony's chart, he had one entity called Principles of Responsible Investment, PRI. So RAM was one of the 6 in the world that took part in the exercise of incorporating ESG in our credit ratings. So ESG is very important, and we took this opportunity also to expand into ESG and sustainability, because we realized that sustainability is something that was very important for the future of Malaysia and many industries that we had. And it was a very critical decision that we made. When we went into ESG, no one talked about it as ESG. When we talked about sustainability, no one was very interested in the beginning, but it was something that we worked hard to challenge, and some of those early people that we met are our clients who have issued green bonds and who have also maybe taken sustainability ratings and so on. But for the steel industry, doing a green bond is not an automatic thing. What is coming up is transition bonds or the transition finance. That means investors that are willing to look at brown or carbon intensive sector and say that, okay, if you're changing this, I'm willing to fund that. And that is the market that the steel sector or when you interact with banks, you must look out for banks that are pushing for transition finance. Next slide, please. Okay, this is you can run but not hide slide. Okay, you have on one corner the climate bonds initiatives, sustainability goals, the ASEAN Green Social and Sustainability Bond Standards. You have the Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosures below. You have all the different principles of responsible banking, like CIMB has that. You have principles of sustainable insurance. So if you're trying to insure your steel manufacturing plant, you would have a lot of issues with insurance companies now that they will ask you a lot more details. And I think the most significant thing in the Malaysian market was the SRI Sukuk framework, Sustainable Responsible Investment Framework, that allowed a lot of new issuers to punch through and bring in new technology. At that time was like solar, mini hydro, and also look at social bonds. But I think the most critical part of this story is your banks asking you questions because Bank Negara, the SC, and the stock exchange have all formed the Joint Committee on Climate Change. Why this is important? Because nearly, well, apart from private equity, nearly all your main forms of energy are governed by these regulators. There was an article that I read from International Securities Commission Organization, ISCO, that came into my email early this morning. If you read that, you'll notice that these guidelines will eventually become regulations. So you still have a lot of time to do things and change, but time is running up. The opportunities. You can just click the next. Just reverse that. Sorry. Back to that slide. Sorry. Yeah. If you look at the third line, sustainability linked bonds or loans. So this is one of those factors that if you are producing, you're responsible for, say, 1 million tons of greenhouse gases, and you are going on a program where you can reduce it. You can go to a bank that is doing sustainability bonds or sustainability loans and tag with them that you want to do a facility that will measure your sustainability progress, but give yourself an improvement in the cost of funding. So if you reach this milestone, 25 basis points less and so on, or if you are investing in equipment that reduces your carbon footprint, how are they going to do it? So the green market has grown, but it's still going to be small. The main market is the transition finance market, and the steel industry can leap forward. And this is actually a good gap in the green versus brown industry, because for the last 5 years, I've noticed that the brown industry was ostracized by green finance, but the brown industry is really responsible for major parts of the economy, especially in ASEAN region. And this is where I think MSI has done a good job in engaging all these parties to discuss these points with you, because ESG can be an opportunity. And all of us here today working together to share our knowledge. And I can't share all my knowledge with you now because it will be days and days, but I am trying to suss out the key points that I want to share with you. Next, please. So when you are doing a sustainability loan or green bond, they have to follow these guidelines: International Capital Market Association, the ASEAN guidelines, and the Securities Commission Malaysia guidelines. All these follow the same backbone of ICMA, and the difference is the ASEAN Green Bond Standards is one of the strictest. It doesn't allow you to use fossil fuels. Next slide, please. Okay. This is what we do for a living at RAM, RAM Sustainability. My sister company does credit rating. I can talk to you on a different day about that, but we look at environment, the social, governance, and positive impact. 20% for the environment, social, 20%, governance, 40%, and positive impact, 20%. Why this mix? When we did our research, we realized this mix gives us a fairly good handle on the sustainability of sort of ESG best practices areas of any particular company. So you can be from the steel sector, but if you do a sustainability rating, you can benchmark yourself against the market and also the other steel players. And governance basically is the character of the management. That is 40%. So you can see how much that ESG, sustainability are very much part and parcel of strategy. Next slide, please. Okay, if you break this down, we go into 36 areas. And we will give you a rating on the environment, social, governance, impact separately. That means, is your environmental positioning in line with the best practices of the steel sector? Social governance, do you follow the Malaysian Code of Corporate Governance and so on? Next slide, please. Okay. This basically shows you that we have looked at about 15 second opinions. These are for green bonds. A lot of them you say, hey, promote, this doesn't apply to us. There's nobody in the steel sector. But where I'm saying is that if you come to the market, maybe with a transition bond, then it will be probably one of the first in the market and the region. Sustainability ratings, you see there are banks that take it up. You have a waste management company. You have banks. You have a forestry company. You have the Malaysian Airport, KLK. There are a lot of others that we looked at. They are not publishing their ratings because one, they are still growing up with the understanding of ESG and they might release it later. But the important point about this is to realize that this is the opportunity you get to shout out how much you are doing for ESG before the regulation comes in and standardizes things. So you have this window, and the data analytics shows you our risk score product with the 1 to 5 rating bands, and I showed you just now the steel is at 13. Okay. Yeah, that's as much as I could squeeze in the time allowed. And I hope you understood my gist.
Thank you, Pramod, and for that very insightful, very compact, on what is important in terms of ratings and what you guys do at RAM. So we don't have much questions from the floor, but I have a question for you. So when you talk about rating, it sort of like comes to me, only the big organization or the public listed companies can afford to do ratings. Now we have seen, since I come from the startup background, we've seen in the last 2 decades, a startup, a young startup starting from zero, and within a period of 10 years, they become unicorns. They become companies bigger than some of the MNCs. And you've seen some of them also actually went downhill very quickly. Now, what are your thoughts about these startups? I'm asking because as an investor in the early stage companies, these are some of the things that we were not able to measure. I mean, they are 3 years old, they are 5 years old. How do we rate them? And of course, for startups, the rating is not really on, maybe not so strong on the E side, which is the environment. But I personally feel that the governance part is really, something that investors could look at, because at early stage, it is about the person driving the company. So is there a light product in RAM, or do you guys plan to have this so that investors like us in early stage could actually use it, right, to assess the young companies that we're going to invest in?
Well, short answer, yes, there is a light product. We call it the rating scan. So that involves a whole new presentation. But in essence, we can work with you on that. Coming back to the ESG element for new startups, the elements, Rina, will be the same. And I would start off with governance. Okay, you may be a small company that you may be 5 people in the company. So someone laid out the capital, someone is doing the numbers, someone is designing the financial product. But you may have all come from banks or the financial sector. You know what is right. Okay, so you don't need to have a 30-page booklet on every product yet, but you start off with your policies. We will be transparent with our clients. We would have a refund policy and so on. Okay, for deals that have gone wrong, or our staff are not corrupt. We all signed the pledge with MHCC and so on. We will look at that. No one is too small to rate, and no one is too big to rate. We'll start off with governance. Then ESG, a small fintech can come and say, "Hey, Pramod, we don't have the money to do the sustainability statement, but our statement is this: none of our employees drives to work. We have a company bus that is electric, that we will pick up our staff. It's solar powered, and all our staff stay. We won't hire anyone which is 5 kilometers away because they can't walk or take the bus." Okay, I'm giving you an extreme scenario, but yeah, no, we will take that into account, right? So why I started off with that 18 or 19 question thing was just to show you it wasn't very difficult filling that up. And if you already have a sustainability team, or you're starting a new business, we can come and look at your electricity bills to start off with. Okay, and there's so many models that are available online that you can use to work out your carbon footprint. Of course, verifying it, if you are going to be listed later on and become a unicorn, of course, you can hire all the top people and consultants to jazz it up. But in principle, there's nothing a small company cannot do that is done by a big company. And I think smaller companies can make a difference because smaller companies are the ones with the latest technology. So you don't have to have people that have been there for 30 years in banking to run a fintech. In fact, you have people with, well, some fintechs could have it, but I think you need newer, younger people to handle that area.
Definitely. I think it's important that the industry or the stakeholders actually provide the environment where the small or young companies can have a head start, because eventually everybody wants to grow big. Everybody wants to get the private equity investments, wants to go to the bank. But if you have a good head start, you don't have to so-called kelam kabut when the time comes, right?
Yes, yes.
So yes, thank you for that. And we have a question from Ms. Zunita from Sirim for Mr. Promote. So the question is, the keyword here, greenwashing ESG has raised some concerns. Do you think sustainability assurance should be made mandatory to give more credit to the sustainability statement or ESG disclosure?
Well, I assume that Sirim does sustainability assurance, so I'll say yes. It's good because then people like me looking at a company will know that the data had some assurance factor or some auditing involved. But I'll say that do everything that you can. Get independent. See, a sustainability statement is like financial annual report. So every company can have one, right? Some will win the annual report of the year, but it doesn't mean that it's a strong company. Maybe they spend too much on the annual report. But likewise, get sustainability ratings because it gives you the relative benchmark. I always get asked this question: why come to RAM? Why not use MSCI? Why not use Zero? Why not use Sustainalytics? The reason why you use domestic ESG rating or in fact a credit rating is to get the different view. A foreign rating agency or sustainability agency carries the natural biases of the maybe European, American, or their own home country biases. And the domestic rating agency, we look at the international factors and we look at the domestic factors. So soybean, palm oil, okay. A foreign ESG rating agency would typically have a lot of issues with Malaysian palm oil, even the RSPO certified guys. But when we look at KLK, Kuala Lumpur Kepong, it's gold on our scale. It is RSPO compliant, it follows rules, and we view it as one of the better clients that we have. So get as many views as you can that are independent, and then let the investor make the choice.
Thank you, Mr. Pramod, for answering the question. I think, like I said, things are still a bit fluid, but I can see that consolidations are coming together, and there's more clarity. Definitely, more clarity compared to yesterday. So, thank you again for your insightful presentation. Do you have any last words that you want our audience to take away from this presentation?
The journey of ESG is not something new. You need to know what your risks are. Once you know what your risks are, you can decide how to deal with it, and it becomes part of your business. Look for opportunities after that. But a good start is get an ESG or sustainability rating. And through that process, you'll know what information you need to prepare for investors and bankers, because investors and bankers rely on our sustainability ratings.
All right, thank you so much. And it's been a long morning. We have come to the last part of our webinar today. So we have Mr. Adlan, who will actually run through a presentation with us, but basically trying to stitch all these together. So if I may summarize, the the fellow speakers who actually presented this morning. So we have Mr. Bovai who actually talked to us about the carbon offsetting, and then we have Mr. Tony Wines, who actually briefed us about, how important is, the ESG disclosure, how you actually measure, how you actually, produce reports. And I think for business owners, I think one of the panel speakers mentioned that the misconception about ESG, everyone thinks that ESG is extra work, is the cost to the company. But if you look at it, when you're in school, you have a report card and your Bahasa is B. Why do you get that report card? So that you can improve and get an A. So if you look at it this way and you actually, use the data in your daily business strategy or planning, I think it is more an investment for the company rather than extra cost. So now we have Pramod, who basically, tells us why we are doing all this. Why are we measuring, our ESG compliance? Why are we, if you're doing extra good, we can actually offset it. That's where you basically have the scoring and the rating, which is actually a very important data set for investors like us. We depend on these third-party ratings to do some of our due diligence. Obviously, a lot of investments decisions is art and a science, right? So now we have got all the science. Let's look at what Atlan had to share with us, on how all these can be stitched together if you are, embarking on your first step in your ESG disclosure journey. Atlan, the floor is yours. And Atlan is actually a director from Penjana Eco. Atlan, all yours. You're between us and lunch. You're muted, Atlan.
Sure. Thank you very much, Rina. I won't make this long. Basically, what I'm doing is I will just be saying how everything ties together from what you heard at 10 a.m. until just recently, right? So next slide, please. Now, when we talk about ESG and when we talk about sustainability, it ties up everything from your people, your processes, your technology, your strategy, and at the end of the day, your financing or your finance options. And it's becoming more and more important as the day goes, because we might see this, or a lot of people might see this as an optional module or something extra to do, but in the future, it will affect the way you attract talent. It will affect the technology that you buy. It will affect how you strategize, or what markets you can enter and what markets you can't. And finally, it also affects your financing, either through attracting investors or through getting a bank loan. So it does concern everyone, and in the future, it will concern you more and more. Next slide, please. So generally, we did this. We showed this to one of our earlier clients, and basically there is a journey that you take if you are starting from scratch, and the idea or the ultimate goal is that you are able to monetize any extra carbon, any carbon credits that you have. That's the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is that you're actually making money out of your environmental consciousness, and that's a great reward. But in between that, you need to do a lot of things. Initially, you need to have the right data, you need to have the right platform, the right technologies. You need to certify and communicate. You need to understand. It all goes in stages. It's very hard to expect you to jump into it straight away, unless you do want to, and then that's where the deployment of resources is required. But usually, it's a step-by-step basis. Right? Next slide, please. So the idea is when you want to reach your ESG vision, and you already have a strategy in place, in order to reach whatever whether you want to reach carbon neutrality, or you want to reduce your emissions by 2.5%, or you want to meet a particular framework, you have to have a right strategy, and you need the three key things that will be underpinning this will be your people, process, and your technology. So I'll just go into a bit detail into each one. Next slide, please. So there's a very famous saying that it takes a village to raise a child, and I think for ESG as well, it does take a large number of your staff to understand, and they need to be trained or be made aware of what is ESG, what are the frameworks involved, what do you need to do to align and meet the objectives, and it can concern areas such as the governance, and then you can also have a leadership, and also to create a culture that complies or places importance on ESG. Now we have clients who already have ESG recording in place, and their culture is such that they feel everyone feels empowered to ensure that the organization reaches the goal. So it's beyond when they enter when they go to their jobs, it's beyond just earning a salary. They are very conscious of the idea that they are doing something to improve what they can towards the environment. Right. Next slide, please. Um, the next one is actually the key. If you can think of like in a tractor, the key machine, the key cogs and wheels, processes and frameworks will help you to underpin the assessment. So, first of all, you need to have the right processes in place, the right frameworks in place to ensure that you can measure your data, communicate your data, analyze your data, right? You also need to understand what are the right parameters and what can you use, right? And finally is of course some sort of validation, certification, or rating on the results of your organization. You see, because the thing is, once you have, say for example, achieved a certain level, you want to communicate this. You want to make it known that you are compliant or you have reached a certain level, and this is where you extract the key value, right? And it helps for your own marketing materials. It helps you to enable access into key markets, which previously you would not have. But the important thing is that you need to report it. You can't just keep the data to yourself and not do anything about it. Next slide, please. Finally, is technology. We have met a lot of organizations who are currently using Excel to record data and things like that, which it works for now, but it won't work for the future. Basically, what you need is actually a better centralized platform that will allow you to share this data with your stakeholders, to allow to share your data with your internal stakeholders as well for analytics, to share it with your leadership team, and to ensure that data integrity is not compromised, and in the future to allow you to have some sort of validation on this data. It's very hard to get it's very hard for you to get some sort of like a data from extended sources as well. I mean, when you're looking at about what we call scope 3, where we need to identify your players in your value chain, it's very hard for you to call each and single one and record it on an Excel file. So what you need is an automated system that will help you to gather all this data and put it in place so that you're able to report better. Right. Next slide, please. So how it all ties up together is that we can help you to achieve your goals through either a single step or through multiple steps, from either step one or all the way towards achieving carbon trading and things like that. So what we can do is we can help you set up the foundation for data reporting, help you have look at the tools and the frameworks for your data management, do a bit of analytics, identify your improvement areas, set your targets. You can also look at obtaining baseline for your carbon, see what your carbon emissions are, and then you can either neutralize or monetize your carbon, depending on what situation you're in. And of course, some sort of a rating or certification that will help you to put out to the world that this is what you've achieved in terms of your ESG achievements. Next slide, please. So if I could have 3 key takeaways from this is, and if you want to start off, with ESG, is that you need to have the right framework, and the right framework for this means you need to have the right technology, the right people, the right processes, the right parameters that you want to measure, right methodologies, everything in place, and you have to also make sure that this data flows from one of your teams to the other in a more accurate, secure, easy to use. manner. Easy to use is very key because a lot of the staff members who will be dealing with this data would not want to waste their time dealing with a complex system. What they need is a very simple instruction: key in here, submit. That's it, right? Secondly, is you need to rate and communicate your results. When you rate and communicate results, you have it out there. That's your value differentiation. The only difference between because when you have achieved something, you need to tell your clients, tell your markets that that's what you've achieved, right? And if you don't do that, they wouldn't know about your situation. And finally, is neutralize or monetize. At the end of the day, you'll be dealing with carbon credits, either to neutralize to make yourself a carbon neutral company, which will allow you to access key markets and everything, or one day eventually, if you're able to even sell your carbon credits, you're able to monetize your carbon and make some money out of it, right? So I think these are the three key takeaways that I've seen so far, and in a nutshell, I think it'd be very beneficial for you to at least begin and I think take stock of your current ESG baseline. Because at the end of the day, the data and statistics that you gather actually reflects your organizational situation. So sometimes you can measure that, for example, if your electrical bill is a bit too high or it's been increasing, then you can identify there's probably some inefficiencies there, right? Secondly, is I think there are new greenhouse GHG based tariffs and regulations that are appearing in your key markets, and it's not long before they will be imposed probably domestically as well. So you need eventually you will need to report. Eventually you will need to comply, and I think it is a good time to start now so that when that carbon tariff, carbon duties, carbon taxes come into place, you are able to react faster and take one foot ahead of the competition, right? So that's all for me. Head back to Rina. Thank you.
Hi, great. Thank you, Atlan, for stitching all the key points together. I think it is important that you have a head start. And I think today, after listening to all these prominent speakers in their own specific target areas in the whole noise of ESG, I think we probably have a better idea right now. So I think that brings us to the end of today's webinar. I really hope each and every one of us have learned something. If you still have questions, burning questions, too shy to ask, do drop the host, Shakira, or just type it in the chat. We will try our best to get back to you. We'll pass the question to the speaker that you intend to ask the questions. So again, thank you so much for your attendance, and back to you, Shakira.
Thank you, Ms. Rina. And now, if there is no other question, we have come to the end of the webinar session. Ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up our morning. On behalf of Malaysia Steel Institute and other speakers, thank you all for making time in your busy schedules to join us for this morning's webinar, and wish you all a pleasant day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good
Thanks.
day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.